The Man with a Twisted Lip by Brianna Garcia from 5th period. Plot summary exposition. The setting takes place in London and Lee Kent. The time which the story takes place is 1889, and the characters are Sherlock Holmes, Dr. Watson, Kate Whitney, Isa Whitney, Neville St. Clair, Hugh Boone, and Miss St. Clair. Plot summary rising actions. Kate Whitney asks Watson to find her husband that has been missing for a couple of days now, and when Watson does find Isa Whitney, he sends him directly back home to his wife. Isa wasn't the only person Watson found at the opium den. Sherlock Holmes was trying to find out what happened to Neville St. Clair. Miss St. Clair had seen him peek his head out of a building, but when she saw what was inside, it was only a beggar named Hugh Boone who claimed that he hadn't seen her husband. Plot summary climax. The climax of the story is when Sherlock reveals Boone's true identity, which was Neville St. Clair. Plot line falling actions. No crime was committed, but then after discussing with Sherlock, Neville knew that he'd have to put Hugh in begging behind him in order to relieve himself from scandals. He returned to his family without being ashamed and have been willing to die in prison. Plotline resolution. Hugh Boone turned out to be Neville, and there were no charges pressed against him. He was able to leave begging in the past and be with his family, although he wasn't making as much money as he would being a beggar. Short story elements. Conflict. Sherlock is struggling to find out what happened to Neville St. Clair and where he is. Sherlock was only given information about St. Clair by his wife, Miss St. Clair. The tone is cold and intrigued. The way the author talks about the case and finding clues shows that Sherlock and Watson were very eager to find out what happened, but at the same time, the vocabulary makes the setting feel cold and as though it was filmed in a black and white era. The theme is there are things that only your mind can see, and I think this is because Hugh Boone was right in front of them the whole time, and if only they'd put together the pieces and what their mind could build up and see that it was actually Neville right in front of them. Short story elements, part 2. Symbol. The letter that Holmes shows Miss St. Clair was a symbol that Neville was still alive. They determined that Neville had actually written the letter, and it was after the accusations that he'd been murdered, so they knew there was still hope. And the setting is London and Lee Kent. Elements / deductive conclusions. One of the parts of the letter that would be evidence that Neville was still alive was that in one certain part of the letter there was black ink that had dried, and the other part of the letter was grayish, so Sherlock was able to determine that Neville had used blotting paper while writing the letter. Sherlock also determined that whoever had written the letter had been chewing on chewing tobacco because of the gum that was used to seal the letter. There was evidence of chewing tobacco inside of it and also the scent of the gum. If the writer was in fact Neville, he was in a hurry because of his skittish hand and messy handwriting, and he had very dirty hands while writing the letter because there were smudge marks along the sides. When Watson doubted the capabilities of Hugh Boone, Sherlock knew that although he had a limp, he was a very powerful man and was able of doing many things. Sherlock also determined that with all the money he had, there were still some money problems going on. Sherlock Holmes, a forensic science and deductive thinker, solves the case along with Dr. Watson. By using his forensic science and deductive thinking, he was able to test out his conclusion, which in the end turned out to be true. His conclusion was saying that all along, Hugh Boone was Neville. He seems to leave people puzzled to what he's thinking about, and this is in the part where everything clicks in his head, and he finds out that Hugh Boone was Neville all along. When he doesn't explain anything to Watson and just quickly takes him to the police station. Dr. Watson. He served time in Afghanistan war and worked in the medical field. He was more involved in this story and showed that he was also capable of solving cases. In the beginning part, he finds Isa Whitney and returns him home to his wife after he had been missing for 2 days. Normally, he helps out and determine what happened to an injured person and without him, Sherlock would not have essential evidence to come to his conclusions. In this case, he helped determine some things about Hugh Boone and his limp. Neville St. Clair, also known as Hugh Boone, was a very clever man that learned from an early age that being a beggar could bring you much larger income. When he was in the newspaper, he was an editor and a journalist. He was offered a position to become a beggar and see how much income they actually made. And once he found out that in a day he could make £2, which was an equal actually to what he made in a week, he decided that being a beggar was a much better idea. He tricked his family into thinking he would go to work every day, and instead his false identity ended up being accused of murdering himself. He said that he would have rather died in prison and let his family uncover his secret. And that's because he didn't want them to know what their father was actually. Miss St. Clair, a very weird wife who barely knew about her husband's work life, but reached out for help when he had disappeared. If she hadn't reached out for Sherlock Holmes, then Hugh Boone could have still been in jail. She was in need of someone to believe her since the police thought that she had just imagined her husband. Sherlock Holmes was the only one that took her seriously and knew that she wasn't making things up. With her help, she was able to determine who wrote the card and confirm that it was Neville. She had obviously known it was Neville's handwriting and helped in a big evidence.